All right, so another thing that we did this week is Karen went and looked at our in-game user interface. We've got over here on the left your regimental colors. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner, this is your regiment. This is your set of units that you've decided to bring into this game. And what you do before you start any game is you select which, right now we're thinking 10, we just select which 10 units you're going to bring into the game, and that could be any 10 units that come from different factions. So let's say I decided to bring units from, I think we'd let you have up to 3 factions. So I want to bring Red Keep and Palava and Ivoria type units into the game. So now I think there's about 10 units from each one of those factions. So I've got about 30 units to choose from. Out of those 30 units, I cull a subset of 10. These are the 10 units from those factions I want to bring. And these are the only 10 units you can summon during the game. When you put that together, you can save that out. That thing's called a regiment. And that regiment that you save, you'll actually assign it its own regimental colors, which are these things up here on the left. So you'll actually be able to make your own little flag for each regiment. And so now when you start the game and other people look at you, they'll see your regimental colors and they can get a little bit of information about which factions are you hiring from and that sort of thing. So across the left here, you see here's our chat button. I can chat with different people. I can look at other user scores and user information in the game. Not their user, but I can see the in-game information for that player. I also can get some information. I can show the hexes on the hexes. I can get my settings menu up. Over here on the right, kind of like Callasia, here's how many turns you got left in the game. Here's a big end turn button that turns green when it's time for you to end your turn when you've moved all your units. I've added a little thing up here, and this is your I want to go from unit to unit to see which units I've moved and which units I haven't moved yet. So let's say I've got 6 units on the screen that I haven't moved yet. This will say 6. I click this and it moves from unit to unit and says these are the things that you've not moved yet, and you can move all of them. As I move my units, that number will go down to 0. When that hits 0, the end turn button turns green. So now there's a very clear way for you to know, all right, I moved all my stuff, I did everything I'm supposed to do, now end my turn. Up here in the right, you see here are my control points, my mana and my gold. Like we talked about in the last session, mana and gold have become a capped resource that refreshes totally every turn. So if you have 15 resource building or 15 gold building buildings and whatnot, and 8 mana building resources and whatnot, every turn you'll get 15 and 8. If you don't use the 15 and 8, then it goes away and it gets replaced next turn. Kind of the same way Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering works, in terms of this is what you get to use for your resources this turn. If you don't use them, they go away and they get replenished next turn. So this tells you how much do you have, how much have you used on your turn right now, and when that gets down to 0, you can't use anymore. Down here, this is my regiment. Click on these guys, click on the screen where I want to make them go. On the bottom left-hand corner here, you can see this is my active unit. This is what I'm interacting with right now, with their attack strength and their hit points, and their move is the little green hex at the bottom. Then you see along the right-hand side here, these are the powers that they have. Excuse this extremely bright placeholder art. We'll make that better in the future. But you can see these are, if this unit has this, and this spell, and I want to know what does that spell do, and I want to cast it, I click there. That gives me the definition of what it does right here with the cost of how much it costs to use it. Click on there, make it happen. You can see along the top, maybe they've got some spells or things that are influencing them. Maybe they were given a special buff, or they've got a curse or something like that that's been cast on them. I can click those right here and it'll tell me here what that thing is and what's going on. So that's that information, and that's it. That's pretty much what the game looks like. So there's a couple ways that you can win the game. In campaign mode, there are specific campaign victories based on the story and the lore and what's going on in this particular campaign. So it may be that you're killing this wizard up in the corner, or it may be that you're taking over this particular building, or maybe you're surviving for X number of turns, or maybe you're building this number of units, or maybe you're collecting this much gold. There's all kinds of things we can do with that. Now, on multiplayer, we're actually, one of the things I think we missed out on Callasia was letting people set up fun-filled games with specific fun victory conditions. And so we're going to look at some tools for when I start my multiplayer game. Maybe we can have like a capture the flag type gameplay, or maybe we can have a first one to so many gold gameplay, so that we can actually have the players come up with sort of different feels for their games. This is something that I would like to do, but I'm not committing to that yet. Not because I don't think we can do it, but because I'm not sure if it's fun or not yet. And so we want to get in, we want to put some of those tools in place. This is something that we'll be doing a little bit further down the road. The basic victory condition in multiplayer obviously is kill all of your enemies and take all of their villages so that they can't build anymore. You have to actually have a city to build a village in. And so if I've taken all of your cities and killed all of your units, then obviously you're knocked out of the game. But there's probably also going to be a victory point win, so we will have that as well. So another thing that we did last week is we've been quietly in the background working on some concepts for some buildings. And I think one thing that people misunderstand when they see game development is they think that like somewhere there's like some big huge GDD and the GDD explains every single thing about the game, and before you start anything you know exactly what's going to be in the game and how it's going to work. Games aren't built like that, right? What actually happens when you build a game is you go through the process of kind of building up prototypes and making things start to work, and then you put in some data and you say, now that I've got this sort of structure for the data to be in, how do I want it to play? So, you know, okay, I came up with this idea to have structures. What structures do we want? And you put in some test structures, and sometimes they're fun and sometimes they're not. I mean, that's the hard part about game development is it's not like we're building bridges. You know, if I were an architect building a bridge, somebody would say, you know, I need this bridge to go from here to there. It's got to carry this much weight. And I'd kind of make some sketches and say, well, that's kind of what I think it's going to look like. And everybody would look at it and go, yeah, we'll build that. And you build that. And as long as it doesn't fall down and it carries the weight that it's supposed to, everyone's happy. But games have, you know, the problem of being entertainment. And just like a song or a painting or anything else, there's an artistic part to it of you get it out and you show it to people and you say, is this good? Is this fun? And it's very difficult to plan fun from the very beginning and know, okay, this is definitely going to be fun. I wish I were a developer and I could write a design doc and be like, if you just made it exactly like this, I promise you it'll be fun. Games don't work like that. You have to kind of prototype them up and play with it and go, this is not as fun as I thought it would be. And so we put in the idea of structures, and the way structures work, here's some structures up here. Here's a bunch of placeholder structures. So let's put in, for the moment, let's put in this little windmill, right? And so the way structures work is when I have a character, a unit, that unit can go to a structure, and when they sit on that structure, that unit will take on new properties based on the structure that he's on. So this artillery tower, when I go into the artillery tower, I will take on the property of being able to use artillery. And so maybe I send my grenadiers in there. My grenadiers have their own abilities. I think the grenadiers in this game ignore fortification bonuses when attacking, for instance. But when the grenadier goes into the artillery tower, that grenadier is now in an artillery tower, and they can use it kind of in the same way that if you were playing like a first-person shooter and you jumped into a vehicle, suddenly you could use that vehicle. Your unit can now use this tower and use the abilities of that tower, which include maybe being able to shoot artillery, maybe if it's a healing building, being able to heal people, blah-de-blah-de-blah, something like that. So immediately on jumping into the building, you take on these new powers. And so the question is, which buildings do we want? Which powers do we want? And how does it work? I got a bunch of ideas, and we put a big list together, and I had the artists go and do me some rough sketches just to kind of see what it would all look like. And here's a bunch of rough sketches of some of the buildings that we are planning on having in the game. Here, for instance, there's a kobold race, and the kobold race gets to have their big stone heads. And you'll notice, by the way, the art isn't done yet. This is still, you know, placeholder, half done, not even colored art. And the reason we did it like that is I don't want to bother coloring it and putting all the time and energy into finishing it until I know that I actually want it. Now, right now, I think the big stone heads are a cool idea. There's some powers that I want to give to the big stone heads. I don't know if that's fun or not. So what I wanted to do was just throw a bunch of stuff in the game. And what we're going to be doing over the next week is putting a bunch of these buildings in the game, testing them, giving powers to them, seeing if they're fun. And if they are fun, then I'll go back to the artist and be like, yep, that thing's cool. Definitely we want to put that thing in the game, make that happen. But you can kind of see we've got some interesting stuff coming up. And one of the things that I wanted to do in the game is I wanted to give the maps a real sense of place and to have that place be tied back to our lore. So you'll notice there's kind of different types of buildings. So here's a great example. Here's this kind of little log cabin, right? It's a little bit weird for a fantasy object, because you don't really think of log cabins as being a fantasy thing. But when we started putting our lore together, and we started having musketeers, and we started having grenadiers, and we had frigates, and all of this sort of slightly more modern stuff, I got to thinking about, well, if we're setting our fashion, and we're setting our weaponry, and we're setting our technology around the 1700s, well, wouldn't the buildings be something kind of like what was built in the 1700s? And in the 1700s, they were making log cabins. That's what colonists who went to America built. They built log cabins that look like this. If I were to just show you this, right? I'm just going to show you some roads in a forest. And I were to say, well, what time is this? Is this the 1700s? Is this the 1300s? Is this barbarians and Vikings? You don't know. But once I put a structure down, suddenly it starts taking a life of, well, this is a structure that exists in this time period. Suddenly it begins to take on culture once you put human objects in it. And so I wanted the structures not just to show the time period, but to show the different races and the different cultures. We've got orcs in our game. We've got elves in our game. We've got these colonial people from overseas. We've got infected undead people. We've got a bunch of things that we're going to be talking about later that are in the game. And I wanted the maps to reflect, this is a place where orcs live, and it's got orc units and that sort of thing. What is this infection that Chris keeps talking about? The story goes that the orcs are responsible for the infection, not the elves. The orcs were losing in the Great War back in the past, and in this Great War, they were getting destroyed, and they prayed to the god of death, and they said, please send us a power that will help us defeat these people who are destroying the orcish race. When I thought of the god of death, I thought, when you see a dead body, what happens? The first thing that happens with a dead body is it gets covered with fungus and lichen and mushrooms. And I thought of mushrooms and fungus as this thing that feeds on death. And I thought, what better sort of metaphor for a god of death than fungus, right? And so I said, all right, the god of death has given this particular, and it wasn't all the orcs, it was a small faction of the orcs, it was a small group of orc shamans that did this thing. They said, all right, you want power over death, we'll give you power over death. Boom. And so suddenly they had this power to, when something died, to fill them with this infectious fungal tissue that takes them over. And so there's Walking Dead, and the Walking Dead have like mushrooms coming out of their eyes, and they're covered in fungus. And it doesn't just affect the animals, it affects everything, because mushrooms grow out of plants and stuff like that. And so these forests and the beautiful lands of Callasia suddenly got taken over by these massive fungal growths, these spore forests and that sort of thing, right? Now, not all the orcs were cool with this. There's another faction of the orcs who turned and they went to the sun god, and they said, we aren't part of any of this. And there's actually a whole different orcish faction of anti-death orcs who are the sun god orcs, and they became fervent supporters of the sun god, and they have, orcish sun god paladins, and they live in the plains and they live in the deserts, and there's a whole story there that goes with that as well. So the reason I tell this story is because I wanted to keep our world not just, this is how orcs feel, this is how elves feel. It's not as simple as that. There's orcs that feel this way, and they have allies. And so, for instance, there's another group of orcs, the Longtooth orcs, which live up in the mountains, and they were a group of sort of orcish refugees that gathered with a group of goblins, and these orcs and goblins kind of banded together, went up into the hills and said, screw all this, we're gonna start our own community up here. And they're sort of a very defensive, very standoffish, sort of almost Nepalese kind of, we're here in the mountains, keep out of our mountains and we're cool, that kind of group of people. And so the factions aren't racially based. So there's the question, is there a fungal faction? No, there's not a fungal faction, but there are factions that use the fungus, right? There are, for instance, there's the Mugroot faction, which is a group of these death-worshipping orcs and a bunch of their fungal friends, and some of the death wizards that can make more fungus people, and they live deep in one of these fungal forests. So yeah, if you like fungus, you better, there's going to be some orcs involved, because the lore is that the orcs themselves brought the infection to this land, and that infection is part of the reason why the humans said, we're out, and actually deserted this land and moved on to another place. So one of the big decisions that we made in the game was to divide factions from races and not have them be the same thing. And the reason that we wanted to do this was to make sure that you could play it either way, right? If we said that the factions and the races were the same thing, and we said like, okay, this is the elf faction and the orc faction, then you would say, okay, I'm going to play the orcs and the elves and the kobolds, and that would, or I'm going to play only orcs, and that's not as exciting a choice as, let's say we have this faction which is the people of Redkeep, and we have a lore that goes with Redkeep, and Redkeep is this city on the coast that the colonists have built, and it was the colonists from Portella, which is a human kingdom, who had befriended the local elves, and the humans and the elves had built this city together. And the human and elf city, they had actually, this is one of the big cities that builds constructs. And so this one faction of Redkeep, which has some sort of historical lore behind it, this city is a place that may have elves, it may have humans, it may have constructs, and so you can summon all of those things from that area. Where I might say somewhere else in Ivoria, Ivoria is, and these are actually two things that are real in the game. I'm not making these up. These are actually in the lore. In Ivoria is a big, huge jungle area, and in this big, huge jungle area, there's a head wizard, and the head wizard has huge powers over animals and beasts. And so, sure, there's humans there, there's some elves there, the elves that have gone to be part of the Ivorian wizards, but there's also beasts there. So there's kind of a flavor. If you like beasts, Ivoria is probably something you might be interested in dealing with. But maybe there's some beasts over in there's another faction, Teresia, which is a big area of farms and things. That area also has some beasts. So maybe I want to bring Teresia, maybe I want to bring Ivoria. So there's this feeling of being involved in the lore and being involved in the history of the game and trying to understand all of that. And it also allows us to mix and match things a lot better. Instead of just saying, I want to play the dwarves, then you may say, okay, well, these are the three factions that I really like that have great dwarf units, and so I'm going to play. But I don't want it to be, I like the dwarves, so I always have to play this faction because that's the dwarf faction. For me, that's a boring choice, and I think we can be more interesting than that. So the question is, how are we going to monetize? How am I going to open up new factions? How am I going to open up new packs? Now, I want to start with, we are not going to make this a free-to-play game. And I want to be very clear about that. There's not going to be any sort of free-to-playness in it. There's not going to be any gacha-style mechanics where you have to keep buying packs and maybe this pack has the hero in it that you want. We're not going to do any of that. I don't like that. As a game player, I don't like that. I feel, personally, for a strategy game, I want to know that everyone has a reasonable chance to play this game at a reasonable level without having to put $100 into constantly buying more packs or anything like that. So that's not something we're going to be doing. So let me put that on the table right up front. What I can tell you is there will be an initial purchase, and that initial purchase is, here's the game, here's all the stuff, enjoy, right? And it's all there. But some of it will be unlocked through the campaign mode. And I know this has been a point of contention. I know some people say, hey, I bought the game. Why can't I just have it all be unlocked the minute I start? Why can't I play anything I want the minute I start? I want to play multiplayer and I want everything to be open and available right now. And I get that, but what happened, we did that with Callasia. And when we did that with Callasia, I think it actually cheapened the experience a little bit, because it's kind of like, Christmas isn't any fun if I let you open everything up all at once. It's a lot more fun to let you open up one present, on Christmas Eve, and open up another present on Christmas morning. If I give you everything all at once, you don't appreciate it very much. And there's a sense of success and completion and enjoyment that comes with having the little bit of frustration of not having it all there and not having it all available to you at the very beginning of the game. So what I would like to do, this is the current plan, is that through playing through the campaign mode, you actually unlock different factions. And so as you get to here, then that unlocks this faction. As you get to here, that unlocks that faction. So that when you are playing other people in multiplayer games and you see them have this unit or that unit, they know that they've played this game and they played through that. This does a couple things. One, I think it makes you appreciate what we're giving you in the game a little bit more. When you get that unit, you're going to like that unit more because you had to do something to get it instead of just having it handed to you. But I think it also means that you're going to get more involved in the lore and more involved in the story, which people talked about wanting to do. So this is the current plan. Is that what I'm promising? Absolutely. And you guys should all lynch me if it doesn't actually happen. Please don't. That may change as we move forward. But one thing I will, hand on heart, tell you, we're not going to free to play this up with a whole bunch of gotcha style mechanics where you have to keep buying packs. I had people suggest that, and I guess there's money to be made there, but not money I want to make. I don't like that style of gameplay, so we won't be doing that.